Welcome to the Intentional Man Podcast, a podcast that inspires and equips men to lead lives of intentionality and grow to their full potential. I'm your host, Jonathan McGinley, a life coach that helps men just like you create the life that you want and live a story of significance through my coaching and tools on intentionality. Thanks for joining, and welcome to the show. All right, welcome back to the Intentional Man Podcast. I'm excited you're here and excited for today's episode. I hope you leave today feeling encouraged and inspired to develop a greater dream for your life. In the last episode, it was called Changing Your Family Narrative. My guest, Rob Bray, told us the story of how he grew up with a father that left his family when he was young to pursue money, fame, and material success. And this left Rob thinking that being a man meant having the nicest car or the most money or having the trophy wife. But as Rob grew up, he was talking about how he came to realize that putting his identity and validation and all of those things, it actually can be a pretty vain pursuit. And he talked about redirecting our masculine energy into things that matter, things that last, using it to love and to lead instead of using it to be liked or to lord it over people. And it was a super powerful episode. It was one of my favorites so far. But it was just really cool hearing the story of someone who has done the hard work to build a life of significance. And he continues to be intentional on a consistent basis to build a life that loves and leads. And something that Rob said just really got me thinking after the episode. He said that he used to think that just being a little better than the example that his father set was enough. He thought that if he got married and just didn't leave, that would make him a great man because that was a little better than his father did. So because his father walked out on the family when he was young, Rob just kind of had it in his head, okay, I just can't beat that. I got to just beat that. But then he said he realized that like just not leaving was not enough. He wanted to build a marriage that was thriving. He wanted to build a strong family and a strong legacy. He wanted to be the best possible man that he could be, instead of just settling for a little better than the model he was given. And he called it going after his blue sky potential. And so as I was reflecting on the conversation, like I was asking myself the questions like, what are some of the areas where I am settling for the status quo instead of pursuing my full potential? Where am I settling for just good enough instead of pursuing great? Where am I playing small in my life? In what areas am I trying to just coast and not make mistakes instead of getting on the offensive and becoming the best person I can be? Like, these are big questions. And I think sometimes it's so easy to settle for the status quo without even realizing it, like to settle for just good enough instead of great. And so today, I want to challenge you to start dreaming bigger. I want to encourage you to find the areas where you're settling and rethink the possibilities. Like, I don't want to just be a decent version of myself. I want to be the best version of myself. I don't want to just have minimal impact on people's lives. I want to have a huge impact on people's lives. I don't want to just coast through life and have a decent life. Like, I want to be proactive and pursue the best version of myself. And I think if you're here listening, like, I believe you have some of the same desires. So I'm going to ask you the same question. What areas are you settling for the status quo instead of being the best that you can be? In what areas are you playing small right now? And it might be time to think bigger. It might be time to dream about reaching your blue sky potential. And I think it's really easy to settle for a low bar for a few different reasons. When I was kind of reflecting on this myself and looking at my past and even what I'm experiencing now, but the first thing I thought of was just comparing yourself to others. And guys, comparison can be such a slow killer of dreams. And it can happen in two different ways, two different types of comparisons. So first, you can compare yourself to others who are setting a really low bar and think that you're good because you're above that standard. And this is kind of what Rob was talking about. He said that he found himself doing this because his father had set a really low bar. Because his father had left the family when Rob was young. Rob thought, like, as long as he didn't leave the family, he was crushing it as a husband and as a father. But if Rob would have settled for just that standard, he would be missing out on this amazing life he's now experiencing, where he's building a thriving family and where he has a marriage that's deep and connected and where his wife greatly respects the man that he is. And it's so easy to look at others around you and think that you're doing things a little better, and so you start to coast. Like you become passive when you get in that spot where you think you're good because you're a little better than somebody else. And so instead of pursuing great and instead of pursuing your full potential, you're comparing yourself to others and you start to settle for decent instead of great. And the other trap of comparison is comparing yourself to others that you perceive to be just way ahead of you. And this often can lead to passivity or inaction because you don't think there's any way you can ever live up to that standard. And so you kill the dream before you ever even get started because you think it's impossible to live up to someone else's standard. In both cases, comparing yourself to those who are settling or that you perceive to be way ahead of you, they can both lead to passivity because it can lead to playing smaller than you should. And like, how sad would it be to never go after that big dream in your heart because comparison is robbing you? How sad would it be to settle for a mediocre career or a mediocre marriage, mediocre relationships, or poor health because we have our eyes fixed on what others are doing instead of just focusing on how we can be the best version of ourselves? Like, and I like to say this, if you're going to compare yourself to your former self. And I actually think this is one of the most motivating things. So instead of comparing myself to other people, I just want to be a little bit better than I was before. So like if you're trying to lose weight, it can be extremely disheartening when you see a bunch of people who seem to be more quote unquote fit than you. When you're focused on them, it can be disheartening even if you're making amazing progress. But when you work hard and you compare yourself to who you used to be, to the habits that you used to have, to the mindset that you used to have, it actually can be really encouraging, even if you're not, quote unquote, as far along as some of these other people. And so, and the same goes for building a business. Like, don't compare yourself to all those who have more successful businesses than you. Compare yourself to who you used to be. Maybe you were stuck in a job you didn't like, or maybe you're too afraid to start your own business. But now you took that leap and you started the business. Like, that's amazing. You did something that your former self was too afraid to do. And this is such a better practice than comparing yourself to others because we are just responsible for becoming the best versions of ourselves that we can become and for stewarding the body and the gifts and the talents and the abilities that we've been given. Because then when you see growth, it's extremely fulfilling. When you see progress, you can be proud. When your marriage is a little better than it was, you can be grateful. When you're a better man than you used to be, you can live in confidence. When your dream has now expanded because you're growing, you can have a lot of hope. And so it's time to stop comparing yourself to those around you and instead focus on what you can do to be intentional every day and to build a life that you're proud of. And one that doesn't settle for just the status quo, that doesn't settle for average, that doesn't coast, that doesn't compare itself to people that you think are below you or above you, but you compare yourself to who you can become or who you used to be. And I often listen to Ed Milet's podcast. It's a great podcast. And I've heard him say that he has a vision of being in heaven one day. And God shows him like a video of the life, like just clips of the life that God had planned for him to live. And he says like he wants to live his life in a way where he's always closing the gap on the man in that video. So if God's up there and he's showing him, hey man, if you would have lived intentionally, if you would have lived for what mattered, if you would have pursued everything that I had for you, if you would have invested your life into other people, this is exactly what you would have seen. This is what you would have experienced. And so he pictures that of like what God would play. And he says, I just want to close the gap on that person. So it's not comparing yourself to anyone else's talents or abilities or anything else. It's, who did I used to be? How can I be a little better than that person? And who is the person that I can become? And I want to do everything that I can to chase that person down. And he's not obviously saying this is the exact thing is going to happen when we get to heaven, but I love his idea here of always try to be the best you can be, live for what matters, and pursue that instead of comparison to other people. So, and one of the other reasons that I think we settle for a low bar too often is the fear of failure. And this is something we've talked about on the show before, but I just hear this over and over from men about why they're settling for a lower standard than they would like. And this is something that I've wrestled with a lot in my life. I continue to wrestle with it. So I just want to talk about it today as well, because I think this can cause us to kind of play small. And if you're going through life just trying not to make mistakes, you're most likely settling for a low bar. Like, have you ever been in a situation where you were just trying not to make mistakes instead of doing a really good job? Maybe you were playing a sport and instead of playing free or playing with confidence, like you were out there just trying not to mess up. What happened? You probably didn't play your best. Or maybe it's at work. Like, you don't want your boss to get mad at you, or you don't want to mess up around your peers. And so you don't speak up. You don't take on the big project. You don't introduce your great idea. Or maybe you don't want to have any conflict in your relationship. And so you don't speak up. You bottle things up. You don't express what's actually really going on. I'm sure you've experienced something similar to one of those situations. I feel like some of my biggest regrets in life haven't come from the mistakes that I've made, but rather the times that I let the fear of failure keep me from pursuing something I really wanted to pursue. And honestly, like, I think on the flip side, some of my biggest triumphs and joys in life have come just on the other side of failure. The pain of inaction and regret is typically bigger than the pain you experience from making a mistake. And I heard a podcast with a man named Colin O'Brady not too long ago. And he said he likes to look at life on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest of highs. So when you get married, when your kid is born, when you start that business, when you accomplish some sort of amazing physical challenge, when you win a championship, et cetera. And then one would be the lowest moments in life. And he said that most people are content to spend most of their time in that 4 to 6 range. It's the most comfortable spot to be in. It's not bad, but it's not great. It's just fine. And there isn't too much pain, but also there isn't a whole lot of triumph. And he said that he's found in his life that you often have to go through the 1s and the 2s and the 3s of life to experience the 8s and the 9s and the 10s. That life's greatest joys and triumphs are usually on the other side of pain and failure, and being on the outside of your comfort zone. And I think that this is so true. Like, I've definitely experienced that in my life. And if you're not currently going through any sort of growing pains, if you're not experiencing some sort of failure, if you're not experiencing some sort of pain, or if you're never uncomfortable, then you're most likely settling for the status quo. Typically, that's how it is. If you're not getting outside your comfort zone ever, most likely you're hanging out in that 4 to 6 range. And it's time to view failure as just a necessary part of pursuing something great instead of something to be feared. Like, when you fail forward, learn from the experience and pick yourself back up. I believe it's John Maxwell says that there's no such thing as failure as long as you learn from the experience. Like, it can become a valuable lesson that you end up being better for because you went through it. And I know that I don't want to end up at the end of my life with regret, because I just lived comfortably in the 4 to 6 zone and just settled for the status quo. Like, I want to build a life that loved. I want to build a life that impacted people. I want to live a life that inspired others to be great and to pursue their dreams. And I know you do too, because you're here and you're listening to this. And I want to experience the joy of those 8s and those 9s and those 10s. But those are usually on the other side of some pain and some struggle and some time spent outside of your comfort zone. So I'll end with asking you the question again. Where in life are you settling for mediocre when you could be pursuing so much more? Is it with your marriage? Is it with your kids, your friends? Is it your health? Is it your career? Where are you settling? Where are you comparing? Where are you being stuck in passivity because of this fear of failure? If you find yourself settling, ask yourself if you are comparing yourself to others in an unhealthy way, or if you're letting the fear of making mistakes, of failure, of being uncomfortable drive you. Just really take a deep dive and think about those two things. See if it's either of those. But let's be men who don't settle for the status quo, but pursue the best. And it starts with getting that bigger vision for your life and getting intentional. And so I hope this episode was encouraging. I know I was challenged and encouraged by some of these thoughts after my conversation with Rob. And so please reach out if you have any thoughts or any questions or anything from this. I always love connecting and following up with any of you. So please reach out. I'd love to connect. But until next time, live a life that you're proud of by living intentionally, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to the Intentional Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and leave a rating and review. If you are someone who is looking to take your life to the next level, accelerate your success, and live more intentionally, I would love to help. Shoot me a text at 970-430-6085, and we can schedule a time to meet to discuss your vision and your goals. Again, that is 970-430-6085. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, build a life that matters by living intentionally.